Welcome, everyone. Welcome to another live stream. No theme song tonight because we need to get right to it. As you come on the stream, be sure to hit the like button, okay? That helps boost the stream and the algorithm, all right? I hope you're all doing well this evening. Welcome, everyone. Welcome again. There was a little bit of a delay, maybe. But yesterday was a day that will live in infamy. It was a historic day. It shook many people, including myself. And I wanted to cover the subject of the assassination attempt on Donald Trump's life. And I wanted to get to it pretty quickly. But before I do, I want to just give you a public service announcement about covering such a topic, okay? So please do continue to hit that like button. That helps fight the censors. But one big issue about covering topics like this, about covering Gaza, about covering Ukraine during the February 2022 period, is there's always a wave of censorship that comes with it. And with that wave of censorship means that channels like myself are actually in danger of being demonetized or worse when we do. So, with that said, not only hit that like button, subscribe if you're new here, hit the notifications bell, but also go to the video description and really do consider becoming a member on Patreon at patreon.com/Danny Hypocrisy. There are annual options, and you get all of this work, all of the notifications of these streams, as well as special posts. I've been writing a bit more, actually, a little bit of prose for all of you. But with all that said, becoming a member really does help this channel keep going beyond whatever YouTube is going to provide people like myself, independent analysts and journalists like myself. So do go to the video description, subscribe on Patreon. There's also annual memberships on Substack. Of course, you can become a YouTube member, but YouTube, unfortunately, does have a penchant for censoring these kind of topics. So I just wanted to get that out right away before we get started. How do I sound, everybody? Let me just make sure that we are live on Rumble before I get started. You can also follow me on Rumble at rumble.com. Do so there. It seems like we are live on Rockfin. So hello, Rockfin family. With all that said, keep hitting the like button, keep hitting the subscribe button, keep hitting the notifications bell as you come in, and do consider becoming a member so that this kind of journalism, this kind of analysis can sustain itself, can continue no matter what the censors do. So let us get started. All right. It sounds like my sound is good according to the audience. Welcome to all the moderators. I see Where Pilgrim, Desert Mantis. I'm sure there are others I am missing. Thank you so much for your help this evening. I want to thank everyone in the audience who may be a Substack member, a YouTube member, a Patreon member. You all are very much appreciated. This stream hopefully won't go on too long, but we might have to go longer in case there are any questions. I am taking all super chat questions every single stream now, with the demand of the audience being very much wanting this. So you can expect that tonight as well. But let us get started. We have to talk about the first story on deck. And what else is it than the attempted assassination of Donald Trump? I'm going to hit on this on more than a few angles. We'll talk about, of course, what happened. Then we will talk about the world's reactions. We will talk about the response from the U.S. political class and establishment about political violence not having a place in the United States. And of course, with a channel like mine that covers all of the political violence that the United States rains upon the world, we have a lot to say about that. And then, of course, I will get into some of the perspectives, the Chinese perspective, the Russian perspective. Then we'll have a story on Ukraine. Then we will likely have a story on Israel and its strikes on Syria, which most of us were not able to pay attention to because of how urgent this topic, this subject we're about to cover about Donald Trump really was. So let us get started. I generally don't cover domestic politics in the United States, not because they aren't important, but because they often come at the expense of foreign policy and any kind of attention to it, at least in the mainstream. Donald Trump was the subject of the latest assassination attempt on a former or sitting president in the United States on July 13th. And this broke the internet. It created a firestorm, and it's caused a lot of questions to be asked about what exactly happened. So, Donald Trump, of course, and right now, Donald Trump is the favorite to win the 2024 elections. It just so happens that Joe Biden has had a terrible last few weeks to a month in terms of his performance, how he looks, his cognition, all of these kinds of questions about Biden's fitness for the presidency have been just swirling around, and the entire establishment seemed to have turned on him. And Donald Trump was giving a rally in Butler, Pennsylvania, just days before the Republican National Convention. And this is what happened. So I'm going to show you the video of what occurred. I'm going to do it with the sound off for about the first minute, just because we cannot show if there are bullets firing, things like that. There will be censorship. So here we go, first without the sound. So there's Donald Trump turning his head, which may be an important point. Talking there's the fire. There was about 8 bullets, I believe, that were fired upon Donald Trump. There you see the Secret Service. I don't know what is happening there, but there's obviously pandemonium. And so we're just gonna now turn. I think we can turn the sound on. Secret Service doing their thing. Whether they were doing it well is another question that a lot of people have. But a lot of confusion here. People don't really know what to do. You see a lot of Americans, what they do is they take video of this kind of event. So we're just going to continue to just see what occurs. The shots had been fired. Secret Service on top of him. Donald Trump getting up. So he has blood on his face, as you can see there. According to reports, some of which we'll get into, he had a teleprompter glass supposedly hit his face. That explains some of the scratches that occurred. He also says that he felt a graze on his ear. Who knows if that was a teleprompter glass or one of the bullets that was fired, but here we go. So that's that's been going around, that picture of Donald Trump throwing his fist up after getting up. A lot of people have been criticizing the Secret Service for allowing his face to be exposed right after he had been exposed to, or right after 8+ bullets had been fired his way. But nonetheless, that picture now will live on for generations to come in terms of characterizing this campaign that he's on, where has his fist up screaming fight, fight, fight. So they're whisking him off. Still mind you, still very exposed. I was shocked. I'm not a Secret Service expert. I don't know anything about that sort of thing. But just in terms of my instincts, if I'm hired, if I am literally trained to protect someone like Donald Trump, my initial instincts would not be, let's move very slowly and have him continue to be exposed to future gunfire. But I wasn't there. How am I supposed to know what's right and what's wrong here? So he was taken into his motorcade and whisked off to the doctors to get checked out. Now, a lot of questions have been swirling about this. I found one of the most intriguing reports was a BBC interview that was done outside of the rally with someone who claims he witnessed the shooter scaling the walls or scaling to a rooftop in order to make the shot at Donald Trump. And here we go. And I want to play not just the first minute or so of this, but then the last few seconds where he asks a really good question that I still have on my mind. And I'll be very transparent about my political views on Donald Trump in a bit. But regardless of that, I have a lot of questions that I'm sure all of you do too. So here we go.
Someone who was here, you weren't inside the event, nope, but you were just outside. Tell us what you saw.
So we had a party here all day. You can see behind us at the Brinkles Farming Greenhouse here. We had a party, and we all decided, hey, when we hear Trump up there, we're going to walk up through the field, stand by the trees out there under the shade, and watch and listen to the rally. Right? We couldn't see him, but we could hear him. So we walked up, and probably 5 to 7 minutes of Trump speaking. I'm estimating here. I have no idea. But we noticed a guy crawling, bear crawling up the roof of the building beside us, 50 feet away from us. So we're standing there, and we're pointing at the guy crawling up the roof.
And he had a gun, right?
He had a rifle. We could clearly see him with a rifle. Absolutely. We're pointing at him. The police are down there running around on the ground. We're like, hey man, there's a guy on the roof with a rifle. And the police were like, huh, what? Like they didn't know what was going on. We're like, hey, right.
Like literally people, ordinary people outside of the rally were saying, hey, look, something is wrong here. There is someone with a big gun scaling the rooftops. Please do something about it. But let's continue.
Right here on the roof. We can see him from right here. We see him. He's crawling. And next thing you know, I'm thinking to myself, why is Trump still speaking? Why have they not pulled him off the stage? I'm standing there pointing at him for, 2 or 3 minutes. Secret Service is looking at us from the top of the barn. I'm pointing at that roof, just standing there like this. And next thing you know, 5 shots rang out.
So you're certain that the shots came from that guy on the roof?
100%. 100%.
And he was up there for a couple of minutes.
He was up there.
You saw him up there for a couple of minutes.
Absolutely. At least
a couple of minutes. So there was a lot of time that elapsed during this event that ostensibly could have been used to stop this, but nonetheless, it was not stopped until well after the event took place.
At least 3 to 4 minutes.
And you were telling the police and the Secret Service?
We were telling the police. We were pointing at them for the Secret Service, who were looking at us from the top of the barn. They were looking at us the whole time when we were standing by that tree.
Could they see
binoculars?
Could they see him?
Probably not, because the roof, the way the slope went, he was behind where they could see. But why is there not Secret Service on all of these roofs here? I mean, this is not a big place.
Did you see? I mean, obviously, everyone, when the shooting started, everyone was very panicked. Did you see what happened to him at all?
Oh yeah, they blew his head off.
Okay, sorry.
Secret Service blew his head off.
Okay.
So that's another thing. What happened afterward was he was taken out. I mean, on the one hand, you could say, well, that was warranted because of the danger of the situation. On the other hand, it does leave now the entirety of the investigation. Everything is now in the hands of the United States government, basically investigating its own failures, its own maladies. And we all know how that usually goes. So now I want to fast forward to when he starts talking about the questions that he has. So here we go. I'm going to fast forward about a minute now. I think it's right about here.
I don't know what to say, man. All I'll tell you is, if I walked up close to there with anything that Secret Service considered a problem, I wouldn't be standing here talking to you right now. But I don't know why a guy who we're standing there pointing out to police and Secret Service is crawling up the roof. Yes, right there by that tree. We were outside the security perimeter. But my question is, there's only a few buildings around here. Why is Secret Service not at every building here?
Well, there's a whole bunch of questions, I think, that are going to come.
There's a whole bunch of questions.
That's the theme. That's the theme. There's a whole bunch of questions, a whole lot of truth that obviously they don't want us to know. And that is why most people are very suspicious about the narrative that has come out. And there are many reasons why we should be suspicious. And this gentleman brought up a really good point. I've heard Candace Owens make a really good point about her husband almost being killed at an NRA event by the Secret Service because he went down the wrong staircase. And that lends Donald Trump was at this NRA event. This is when she was close to Donald Trump. And she said, well, how could it that someone like this could just waltz around the perimeter of a major event of a former president like this, and the Secret Service and security and all of this, just completely dropped the ball, missed it, and essentially were culpable in the fact that Donald Trump was this close, really close to being a goner. So really just so many questions that need to be asked. Here is the latest report from the Associated Press about what we know and do not know. The FBI, of course, is saying that they do not know the motive, that they're investigating it. Trump heads a convention as authorities investigate the motive in the attempt on his life. So, of course, Trump was calling for unity and resilience after the attempt on his life added fresh uncertainty to a tumultuous presidential campaign and raised sharp questions about how a gunman was able to open fire on the Pennsylvania rally. A full day after the shooting, the motive is still a mystery, and investigators said they believe he acted alone before being fatally shot by Secret Service agents. An independent security review has been ordered by Joe Biden, which killed the review of the attack, which killed a bystander and critically wounded 2 others. The FBI was investigating the shooting as a potential act of domestic terrorism. So that's the thing, too. People did get hurt. People did die. Donald Trump did not get killed, but somebody did, and there were pretty severe injuries to a couple of others. So I want to now scroll down, okay, to this part, okay? The FBI identified the gunman as Thomas Matthew Crooks, 20, of Bethel Park, about 50 miles from the scene of the shooting. The gunman and his father's AR-style rifle was perched atop a nearby roof, while some rallygoers pointed him out to local law enforcement, said 2 law enforcement officials to the Associated Press. So here is the map. Okay, there he is. There's the stage. I mean, this is literally the single roof where you could do this. It's just absolutely mind-boggling how this occurred. I don't know where else this gentleman, this 20-year-old child, could have done this, but there you go. He was about 150 meters away, firing several shots. They say that he climbed the roof and found Crooks, a law enforcement officer. This is what is also very stunning. A law enforcement officer climbed to the roof and found Crooks, who pointed the rifle at the officer. The officer retreated down the ladder, and the gunman quickly fired toward Trump, the official said. That's when the U.S. Secret Service gunman shot him, said, quote unquote, officials. Now, that says a whole lot of nothing, but at the same time, what we are now led to believe with this is that, one, this guy was pretty well prepared. He could point his rifle at a law enforcement officer and then turn it around and begin firing. Obviously, the operation was botched to some degree, but there's so many questions we will never know because he is not alive, and we cannot trust those who are conducting the investigation, right? And that's the big issue, I believe. So they're trying to find motives. Crook's political leanings are not clear. He's a registered Republican voter in Pennsylvania, but a federal finance campaign reports show he gave $15 to a progressive political action committee on 2021 of January when Biden was sworn in as president. There's no clear ideological motive. So here's the thing. He could be a Republican. A lot of Republicans don't like Trump, right? A lot of Republicans, there's some saying that maybe the Republicans, there are Republicans who don't want Donald Trump to win. They know that they have kind of an easy path toward the presidency, and maybe they just don't want Trump to be the president. And of course, there are those who are so suspicious of anyone who had any affiliation with the Democrats, even if Crooks donated when he was 17 once to a Democratic Party platform, that makes him, a liberal who is just out of his mind, Trump derangement syndrome. But we will never know that. All in all, there are many different kinds of scenarios about the motive. But to be quite frank, I think what is most suspect about this is how he was able to pull this off. And I don't think anyone buys the lone wolf scenario one bit. Now, I want to show you what Brian Berletic, friend of the show, he has been a frequent guest on here when he was doing appearances, and we all should be wishing Brian well in his ongoing work. He does really great work, and I tend to trust him on these matters, especially when it comes to matters that have to do with the military, because he did serve himself. So here is what Brian Berletic had to say about the Secret Service. He said the huge American flag flying over Trump's head served as an ideal wind flag, indicating for a potential assassin wind speed and direction. Such indicators are used on all military security firing ranges. Such indicators should have been prohibited by security. There you see the American flag in that photo. All potential positions for an assassin were almost certainly assessed. Video evidence suggests security and snipers pointed in their direction, but apparently access to them was left unguarded. If the audience saw the assassin moving into an obvious firing position, trained snipers and scopes certainly did. It is difficult to believe the Secret Service was so systematically incompetent. Okay, and so there you see, okay, that he would have been well within range, that there were trained snipers ready in position. This would-be assassin acted very unprofessionally, taking up firing position out in the open, making his mission a guaranteed one-way ticket. The fact that he even managed to hit Trump means he obviously had experience firing a rifle, but little to no tactical training. If security lapses were intentional, I wouldn't be surprised if he was approached by someone like the FBI, walked through the whole process like many subpar terrorist suspects the FBI is trained, given weapons, explosives, too often arresting them at the last moment, but once in a while accidentally failing to do so before a live attack. And he posted this picture of an affidavit in 2010 where Mahmoud and undercover FBI operatives traveled to a remote location in Lincoln County, Oregon, where they detonated a bomb concealed in a backpack trial run for an upcoming attack. So yes, this is a real problem, okay, that makes people really suspicious of what is going on here, okay? People claiming the flag is not a factor because this shooter was close enough where winds wasn't a factor are missing the point that it is still a fundamental security lapse unless Secret Service knew there'd be a shooter and exactly where they'd be shooting from. So we don't know, okay? This is all speculation. But at the same time, there are a lot of really, really suspect things about this whole operation, what just happened. Look, Donald Trump is not well liked by the establishment. I do not like Donald Trump for his politics. I don't like his policies. I am very critical of Donald Trump. I see him as part of the oligarchy. I see him as part of the elite. I do not see him as an outsider. I see him as being an agent of chaos that was spawned by a system that has completely lost legitimacy. And that means, though, that Donald Trump is also not well liked for different reasons, albeit I believe illegitimate ones. Donald Trump is not well liked by many segments of the political establishment. These include Republicans, of course, Democrats, neocons. There are many in the establishment who do not like Donald Trump and who have intimated for his destruction and his elimination. And I just want to show you, okay, some of the media takes, right? And this was interesting. And this is something that's been going on since the beginning of Trump's ascendancy into politics, for as problematic and as reactionary as Donald Trump is, because I am not a Trump fan. I believe, we can go down the line in foreign policy blunders, domestic policy blunders, the things he has done and signed off on to hurt people, and we'll get into those later, whether it's sanctions on Venezuela, sanctions on Russia, whether it is the strikes he did on Syria, whether we are talking about Yemen. We can go on and on and on about what Trump has done, the lives that he has taken. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of they don't hate him for that. They hate him for being unpredictable and for speaking about Russia in a certain kind of way. And we can go on and on and on. But the point here is that, look, the corporate mainstream media covering this event was atrocious. Look at this. Trump says he was shot in the ear during rally. Authorities say shooter is dead. So we're looking at Trump says he was shot in the ear. I mean, even if there are questions about whether it occurred or not, like the details, right? Was he actually shot in the ear? We don't, if you didn't know that, you know that he was shot at. So you should probably report that he was shot at. But no, he says he was shot in the ear. Okay. Trump injured in shooting at Pennsylvania rally, in a shooting, as if he wasn't the target of the shooting. I mean, this is how low the mainstream media has gotten when it comes to covering events like this, right? So this was an absolutely atrocious set of developments. It just exposes the United States for all that it is. The United States is an agent of chaos. It's an empire in decline. And we don't know who did this or how it happened, why it happened yet. We may never know all of the details in full. But what we do know is that the U.S. political class, the elites, who are responsible for the most devastating and most destructive policies, both in the United States and abroad, right? Because it's not just that the United States levels political violence abroad. It happens in the United States as well. Massive numbers of prisoners, casualties taken because of police violence. We can go on and on and on. Massive surveillance, the censorship that we experience on platforms like this. This is not political violence, is not something strange to the United States. In many ways, the U.S. was founded on a kind of political violence. But the political violence that the United States enacts on the world has blown back very hard on the United States. Okay. The United States is an empire that no longer has legitimacy, and it can no longer hold on to all of its ill-gotten spoils. It became the richest country in the world in many measures on political violence. And now that it cannot hold on to it, it also cannot hold on to the image of being a so-called exceptional country. And because it cannot hold on to this, the political elites who control the system, who are supposed to be administrating the system on behalf of their paymasters, are in fact losing it. They're losing control. And Donald Trump is a reflection of that control that has been lost. And that's why there's so much animosity toward him. That's why there was Russiagate. That's why there has been a constant campaign to frame him as an existential threat. It's not because he's actually an existential threat. If Donald Trump were to, and I believe he will be elected in November, he's not going to pose a threat to the establishment all on his own. What's a threat to the establishment is what Donald Trump sitting there does to the legitimacy of the United States around the world. Donald Trump's ability to ascend politically, it really is a terrible reflection on those who are supposed to be leading. the United States into some kind of exceptional glory, which they do not, cannot, and will not. So the United States is in a very, very, very dire situation. And this attempt to take Donald Trump's life, we don't know exactly why it happened, but we know the conditions were created by a system in complete disarray and chaos. That is why something like this occurs, is because there is so many focal points, so many areas, politically, economically, foreign policy, all of it, where people look around and they see nothing but misery. And when you have that as the prospects for the future, then you have plenty of opportunities for anyone who wants to go after the so-called existential threat like Donald Trump. You have many opportunities to coax and push someone into doing so. Again, I don't believe Thomas Crooks was acting alone by any stretch of the imagination. In any event, I want to now move on to Joe Biden's response and the world's reaction to this, as well as getting some perspective on how others around the world have been looking at this development. All right. So, and we're going to just absolutely destroy Joe Biden's complete and utter hypocrisy on this. So, Joe Biden first gave a 2-minute presser that was a bumbling and really just downright pathetic display of exactly why Joe Biden will not be president in 2024, because he's having a hard time cognitively. And I'm not going to show it, because this isn't about just lambasting and ramming Joe Biden's physical maladies here. But he gave another small talk on his response
Yesterday's shooting at Donald
to what happened. And here we go. We're going to listen to Joe Biden for a little bit.
My fellow Americans, I want to speak to you tonight about the need for us to lower the temperature in our politics. And to remember, while we may disagree, we are not enemies. We're neighbors, we're friends, co-workers, citizens, and most importantly, we're our fellow Americans. We must stand together. Yesterday's shooting at Donald Trump's rally in Pennsylvania calls on all of us to take a step back, take stock of where we are, how we go forward from here. Thankfully, former Trump is not seriously injured. I spoke with him last.
What? He's not he's not seriously injured. Former Trump is not seriously injured. But anyway, let's keep going.
Last night, I'm grateful he's doing well, and Jill and I keep him and his family in our prayers. We also extend our deepest condolences to the family of the victims who was killed. Corey was a husband, a father, a volunteer firefighter, a hero, sheltering his family from those bullets. We should all hold his family and all those injured in our prayers. Earlier today, I spoke about an ongoing investigation. We do not know the motive of the shooter yet. We don't know his opinions or affiliations. We don't know whether he had help or support, or if he communicated with anyone else. Law enforcement professionals, as I speak, are investigating those questions. Tonight, I want to speak to what we do know. A former president was shot, an American citizen killed, while simply exercising his freedom to support the candidate of his choosing. We cannot, we must not go down this road in America. We've traveled before throughout our history. Violence has never been the answer. Whether it's with members of Congress of both parties being targeted and shot, or a violent mob attacking the Capitol on January 6th, or a brutal attack on the spouse of former Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, or information.
I'm going to stop there only because, of course, it's becoming a bit politicized, but also the point here is Donald Trump. Joe Biden, I'm turning into Joe Biden, I guess, but Joe Biden is saying there's no place for political violence in America. And this has been what the political class has been repeating over and over and over again. There's no place for political violence. Well, let's this is an interesting take, right? Because political violence is the primary means of which the United States uses to maintain its hegemony. And here we have a Twitter user, Rev Lascaris, says, "Dear Obama, like many others, I have not forgotten what you did to Gaddafi. You're a hypocritical war criminal. F you." And that's because he said there's no place for political violence in our democracy. And there is Gaddafi being assassinated. So this has been a theme, okay, for a lot of folks. Here is a friend, Margaret Kimberly, what she wrote. She wrote, "Political violence has no place in our country. Well, it sure as hell has a place in the rest of the world. And there is the U.S. military and CIA intervention since World War II. As you can see, there are more than 50 of them, and they are everywhere in the world. And we cover all of those here." So I also posted here, just to bring home this point. This is what they don't want you to know about this assassination attempt, is that it really is about war coming home. As Malcolm X said, chickens coming home to roost. As Martin Luther King said, the bombs that explode abroad, the bombs that are dropped abroad explode at home. And here you have U.S. intervention since World War II. The U.S. has been at war for 230 years out of 247 in its history. And not one generation of Americans has experienced peacetime. And there's all of the interventions, all the military operations. This is actually probably undercount in terms of operations, but in terms of actual wars, this is all U.S. involvement. From we're going all the way to China, 1945, 46, in order to keep the KMT in power, all the way to, of course, the latest aggressions toward Iran, toward Syria, toward Yemen, etc. Of course, Gaza's got to be in there, Ukraine, onward and onward. Okay, so I wanted to now show the fact that Donald Trump is also an enactor of political violence. There are a lot of people who believe that Donald Trump is the preferred candidate. He is for peace in Ukraine. And it has to be said that Donald Trump, in both campaigns, this one and his first one, he did campaign on a isolationist, you could call it, foreign policy, a foreign policy where relations would get better with Russia, where he would negotiate with certain world leaders. And in some respects, he did. He did do the Helsinki summit with Vladimir Putin. He did attempt to hold serious nuclear talks with Kim Jong-un of the DPRK. But of course, when he did become president, he also enacted incredibly dangerous foreign policy maneuvers, and one of which, okay, I was in China at the time when this occurred, and many thought that a world war would be sparked because of this. When the United States, under Trump, it was Trump who ordered a drone strike to kill Qasem Soleimani, one of the top generals, most decorated generals of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. Qasem Soleimani was killed in a Baghdad airport on a drone strike on a Baghdad airport back in January 2020. I was in China at the time, and we all were holding our breath about whether we would be coming back to a world war situation. And that was one of the biggest provocations with Iran in modern history. So Donald Trump has his own interventionist foreign policy that cannot be negated even now, even despite the fact that he's been attacked, that he has been now the subject of a literal act on his life we also have to keep in mind that this doesn't necessarily make him some kind of rogue actor for peace. What it does make him is a very, well, on the one hand, he will likely become a far more popular political figure among those who support him and those who might have been on the fence about him. But on the other, it also ensures that the actual policy agenda of the entire United States empire, those who actually hold power, will likely become secondary once again, as generally is the case during elections, while we speak about the aftermath and the fallout of this assassination attempt. And so that is really where the problem, in my estimation, resides. It resides in the fact that we now have a conspiracy on a former US president, which takes our eyes off of all of the problems that are actually afflicting ordinary Americans and that are afflicting the global majority. The fact that we are so close to a world war scenario with two major powers abroad, and the fact that the United States' war machinery has become so large, so big, and so uncontrollable that it is having huge ramifications on the, we could call it, culture or social relations in the United States. It is a militarized culture. It is one that is bereft with not just guns is like, oh, we're going to protect ourselves. It is bereft with the weapons industry, right? That's different than people just taking up arms and saying we're going to protect ourselves from the government. This is not what we're talking about. We're talking about people who have, no matter who they are, they have access to these guns and they are being exploited, being used, I believe, by nefarious forces. And we don't know who those are yet, but I am not believing for 1 second that this is a lone wolf situation. And it just so happens that the material conditions in the United States are just so perfect for something like this to occur. And so while Donald Trump is going to get all of this sympathy now, as you know, many people who are just looking at this from the outside without an understanding maybe of the broader implications of this, they look at this and they say that guy was targeted, that guy is a victim, and he will gain much sympathy for that. And that's where this all backfires so hard on the US political establishment, which I believe has many reasons to want Donald Trump no longer to be in politics. So I want to now read the Chinese perspective on this, okay? Because it's very interesting. You know, China is a very diverse place, and many people think, oh, there's only government perspectives. But Zichen Wang, who I met in China, he is a fellow, I believe, at the Center for China in Globalization. He shared a post, an analysis from Haolon Wang, okay, who writes a blog called America Watching. All right. And he wrote an analysis I'm going to read the points on. Okay. So the political repercussions. So this is from a Chinese perspective looking, looking out from the outside, looking in. So the attempted assassination of Donald Trump at a campaign rally in Pennsylvania marks the first instance of a former presidential candidate being injured in an assassination attempt since Ronald Reagan in 1981. This event makes Trump one of 3 presidents in U.S. history to have survived an assassination attempt with injuries. The identity of the assailant remains unclear. Okay, so this is a little outdated. We know Thomas Crooks is the identity of the assailant, but they say, but again, we don't know if he was the only shooter, the shooter. There's still a lot of questions. The perpetrator is a white male in his 20s from Pennsylvania. Specific motive is still unknown. So that's true. Trump himself was not seriously harmed, only suffering minor injury. However, photos from the scene indicate the shooter missed hitting Trump's head only by a narrow margin. And so that's, if you want to see just how ridiculously crazy this was, I'll just pull it up for a second. A photo from the New York Times shows, look at this. This is from my community post. Look at that. There's the bullet, right? So his head was just leaning to the side just enough not to get hit. And that is pretty just incredible luck. And at the same time, it just shows that we were very close to something that would have just absolutely changed the political calculus in the United States very quickly. Okay. So politically, many are comparing Trump's survival and his robust response to what they term a 319 moment in American politics, drawing parallels to the 2004 Taiwan leadership election eve shooting that swayed the results in favor of the Democratic Progressive Party candidate. Some declare that the outcome of this year's election is now certain, predicting a landslide for Trump. However, such conclusions may be premature. Deep-rooted political polarization in the U.S. means overwhelming victory is unlikely under any political circumstances. The unexpected assassination attempt underscores persistent uncertainties in American politics and elections, warranting continued observation of the election's trajectory. So if that isn't the most Chinese kind of analysis, very balanced, very deep understanding of how it may be unwise to assume Donald Trump. And this is very American, right? To just assume it'd be a kind of a prisoner of the moment. So everything's just looking great for Donald Trump. He's going to look a hero. He's going to walk into the Republican National Convention a hero. Look at the survival. Look at the optics. And all of that is true. I do believe that Donald Trump is in the driver's seat right now. But I do also believe that lots of things can happen. If July 13th was indication of anything, it's that a lot can happen in a very short amount of time. But in the short term, he's likely to gain sympathy votes, boosting his approval ratings. However, temporary polling increases may not sustain until November. The Democratic Party, embroiled in internal conflicts and debates over replacing President Biden, might see these discussions subside due to the assassination on Trump. This shift in the news cycle could help Biden regain footing amidst an otherwise unfavorable media environment. The prevailing pessimism within the party might become more pronounced, possibly leading to resigned acceptance of a likely defeat without further efforts to replace Biden. And I believe that's another good point. It's another good point. If you want to know anything about domestic U.S. politics, it's that events like these, because we tend to be prisoners of the moment, also might have beneficial aspects for Joe Biden. Joe Biden have been very adamant about never leaving the race. This could very well help them do so. In the coming period, American politics might enter a phase of relative cooling, with the Democratic Party likely to reduce attacks on Trump and his ideology, thereby losing a crucial tool for internal party unity. On the other hand, the Republican Party will need to handle the aftermath of the assassination attempt cautiously, avoiding politicization that could alienate voters. Political advertisements and campaign activities from both parties may enter temporary adjustment phases. The frequent incidents of political violence and severe social division reflect a systemic crisis underlying in the American democratic system. Political polarization and veto politics have eroded the fabric of American elections, leading to a legitimacy crisis where public opinion fails to translate into policy. Okay, this has fueled the rise of populism and hate politics, the occurrence of assassination attempts on key political figures, a phenomenon not uncommon in American history, reemerging in the 21st century is not surprising, as it suggests an increasingly extreme political environment with more pronounced voter antagonism in the months leading up to the election in the coming years to come. Such acts of political violence are likely to be more frequent. So I think that's a pretty sober assessment on the reality of what happened here. So there's a Chinese perspective. I mean, I do see a lot of those points taking place, taking shape. But then again, there's an unpredictability to all of this because none of us could have predicted that this attempt would have been made at this event. How were we to have known that July 13th would be the day that Donald Trump would just miss by a hair his own demise at the hand of an assassin? I mean, it's absolutely something that maybe should have been predicted, almost like the Ukraine crisis should have been predicted, Ukraine conflict, the special military operation, but we couldn't because the moment had not emerged. But now we know that the conditions in the United States, the political conditions, which are born from a legitimacy crisis, that is one thing the Chinese author here, Mr. Wong, has completely correct, that public opinion fails to influence policy in the United States. The United States is an empire completely dictated by just a very tiny few people. Those tiny few people, you call them the elites, many of them, if not a large section of them, don't like Donald Trump either, which is why he is associated with populism, even though his base is arguably not a majority of the US population. There really isn't no majority in terms of partisan politics because a lot of people these days don't associate themselves with either political party. But he holds a large and significant number of people who support him. Some of them might watch this program. And not only have those folks been supporting Donald Trump, but they all see, and everyone outside of Donald Trump's support base see, how he has been the target of a pretty vitriolic campaign from the ruling elite, that the media, the mainstream media attacks him, that they constantly, and they attack him for reasons which are absolutely uncredible. So on the one hand, right, I'm critical of Donald Trump for his foreign policy when he was president, his domestic policy when he was president, the things that he did that actually hurt people, that he either went along, whatever you say, he went along with it, he had to do it, or he was an active agent in it. I believe all three happen at the same time. But regardless, Donald Trump has done many, many terrible things when under his political reign. And also as someone who is an oligarch who has money in places that just are inherently exploitative. However, the reasons that the political elite go after him are essentially Cold War 2.0 reasons, right? Reasons that I can never endorse. I could never endorse criticizing Donald Trump for Russiagate. That's absolutely ridiculous. Russiagate was a lie, and it's a big lie to continue this absolutely dangerous policy of moving toward a global war with Russia, right? Donald Trump's policy toward Russia was very all over the place, and in the end, it led to a more hostile American position toward Russia. It wasn't as hostile as he was toward China, but nonetheless, it was hostile. Nevertheless, he was still attacked just over and over and over again as some kind of agent of Vladimir Putin. So attacked that the Russian perspective here, while Vladimir Putin has said that he is not endorsing Joe Biden because endorsing Donald Trump because Joe Biden is more predictable. Regardless, here's how RT, Russian media, saw this issue, and a lot of people have been pointing this out. A look at the violent rhetoric against Donald Trump. So now we're getting Russia's perspective. Before he was shot at a campaign rally, the former U.S. president faced a barrage of threats from the quote-unquote left. They capitalized left. So what they are saying is Democratic Party. Democratic Party is not left. It's a right-wing party. It's a party of the elite. Let's be honest. I take a huge offense at Democrats being called left. If you want to say, okay, it's the left-right paradigm within the establishment, fine. I'm not going to quibble. I'm not going to get into some kind of useless debate about terminology. But nonetheless, it has to be said that the Democrats, those who oppose Donald Trump for reasons like being some Putin's puppet or, threatening NATO, right? They always say, oh, Donald Trump is going to pull out of NATO. Those reasons are completely illegitimate and not to be taken seriously. What is serious is how the U.S. is led by such psychopathic warmongers that they're willing to try to use warmongering to delegitimize someone like Donald Trump. That's how desperate, that's how also feckless and completely and utterly bankrupt the U.S. political establishment really is. Okay. So this is what they had to say. Okay. They said the attempted assassination of Trump has been roundly condemned by political opponents. Liberal politicians and pundits have explicitly and implicitly called for his death before. Trump narrowly avoided death at a campaign rally in Butler, Pennsylvania on Saturday when an assassin's bullet apparently clipped his ear as it whizzed past his head. The shooter, named by the FBI's 20-year-old Thomas Matthew Crooks, killed one spectator at the rally and wounded 2 others before he was shot dead by Secret Service agents. And, everyone's saying there's no place for political violence in America. But since Trump won the 2016 election, and you could say arguably before this, but he has been facing a steady stream of threats from Biden's party and allies in the media. So here we have Off with His Head. Here you see Kathy Griffin literally with his an imitation of his head. I mean, that stuff kind of makes me queasy, so I'm just rolling through that. That's just very low. That's something that doesn't help anything. If you oppose Trump because he's in a part of the elite, then we have to be more sophisticated. But Kathy Griffin's part of the elite, so let's be honest. These are bankrupt people. Johnny Depp in 2018 wondered when was the last time an actor assassinated a president. Adding, maybe it is time. Okay, so that's another example. And then here you have taking him out. Here you have a representative, Representative Dan Goldman, so someone literally in the U.S. government. Look at what he had to say here.
But his rhetoric is really getting dangerous, more and more dangerous. And we saw what happened on January 6th when he uses inflammatory rhetoric now, and his recent Truth Social post is incredibly, incredibly scary for anyone that might be trying to work in government. And it is just unquestionable at this point that man cannot see public office again. He is not only unfit, he is destructive to our democracy, and he has to be eliminated.
He has to be eliminated, is what Goldman said. All right, he has to be eliminated. That's a congressman. Absolutely ridiculous rhetoric from people who are trying to save a democracy that doesn't exist. The United States is not a democracy. It's a plutocracy. It's an oligarchy. It is completely captured by corporations and by elites who pay Goldman, right? Everyone's talking about Gaza and Israel's influence over Congress with AIPAC. That's just one, right? We're talking about a PAC-laden, corporate captured war. It's completely captured by war profiteers. This is not a democracy. So anyone who's attacking Donald Trump for being a threat to quote unquote democracy, they're spreading Cold War lies. They're trying to paint him. They've done it before. Paint him with Putin, and they used to Xi Jinping and other so-called Bolsonaro, right? They just paint them as in this camp of authoritarians. But the truth of the matter is that there's no more authoritarian government in the United States, because not only is it incredibly repressive and oppressive, both at home and abroad, but it spawns all of the most oppressive and repressive institutions, systems, governments that exist around the world. That is the role of the United States. So Goldman later apologized for his words. He was not the only representative to do this. Cynthia Johnson was stripped of her committee assignments in 2020 when she warned Trump and his Trumpers to walk lightly or else her soldiers will make them pay. Nancy Pelosi has used similar rhetoric over the last week when she declared the upcoming presidential election is not a normal election and Trump must be stopped. He cannot be president. So David Aronovich wrote on X, a BBC reporter, that were President Biden, I would hurry up and have Trump murdered on the basis he's a threat to America's security. All right. And then he had to say that he was being satirical. So, I mean, these are people with massive amounts of influence. Okay. I do not support Donald Trump politically. I don't support his economic policies. I don't support any of his policies. I would never go on air and say, hey, guys, you need to do something to Donald Trump. I would never do that. Why? Well, because it's, first of all, it's a criminal act. Why would I incriminate myself? In addition to that, if I really want to seek true change, if I'm using this platform to inform people so they can be more educated, so then they can make decisions that put pressure on people in power, do I really think the most effective method is what these people are calling for? Absolutely not. They're not calling for anything substantial. They are recklessly throwing around rhetoric and creating the conditions for something like July 13th to have happened. And that is right. A lot of people pointing that out. That is just 100% correct. And you don't have to be a Donald Trump supporter to point that out, because this is not helping anyone's cause. It is not helping anyone's cause who wants to see something good in the United States happen, who wants to see change for the better, who wants to see peace, who wants to see the warmongering stop, the plutocracy stop, the theft, the corporate theft, the exploitation, the oppression, the racism, all of it, the genocide in Gaza. You think this helps any of that? It helps none of it. So all those liberals and so-called leftists who are, licking at the chops, saying, "Oh, I'm so mad. I see destiny," and you see these just bankrupt, complete and utter sycophants who are only in whether it's media or activism or whatever for their own gain. They're talking about it so lightly. "Oh, well, too bad it didn't work," or they're laughing at the person who was actually killed in this. I mean, all of that is just disgusting behavior. There is such thing as professionalism, and people take it seriously. Doesn't mean that you got to be an elitist, you got to be stuck up and snarky and all of that arrogant, but it means you have to present yourself in a way where people will take you seriously, so they will listen to you, and perhaps they will make decisions based on what you say. And I have to say that a lot of people in the so-called liberal class just continuously fail on that metric. And it's unsurprising, because they are the big problem here. They're the reason why we have things like July 13th, but we don't have healthcare, we don't have peace. That's just the fact of the matter, all right? This empire is just dying. And here you have, look at Joe Biden. Look at this tweet they pulled up. He's a genuine threat to this nation, a threat to our freedom. He's a threat to our democracy, everything America stands for. No, he's not. He is everything America stands for. You are everything that America stands for. You are the problem, Joe Biden. This is the rhetoric, right? A genuine threat to this nation, always painting Donald Trump as outside of the United States. Donald Trump he was born in the United States, whether that matters or not. He was raised in the United States. He became an oligarch in the United States. And his politics are not unrepresentative of the United States. But to paint him as some kind of foreign agent or something outside of the United States does make him a target. And these are the same people who say xenophobia, anti-immigrant, all of this. They're the ones who are championing the most grotesque forms of Cold War, literal Nazism, in my opinion. Literal Nazism, in my opinion. The most disgusting anti-Russia, anti-China, anti-Iran, anti-Syria, anti-Palestinian, the most vile rhetoric about this. And they're the ones who claim that they're pro-immigrant. They care about migrants. No, you continue to fuel the wars that are destroying countries, which cause migration in the first place. Nobody wants to come here unless they're forced to. Let's be quite honest about that. Or they're from some kind of social class that allows them to reap benefits from a system that only gives benefits to a few people. But outside of that, when you talk about migrants coming from places that have been torn up by U.S. wars, Central America, right? That is not a choice. Whether you think it is or whether or not, it's not a choice. But these are the same people, right? They support these wars. They spew out this Cold War rhetoric, and then they call Donald Trump an existential threat to this nation. No, he's just of this nation. He's of this nation for all of its ugliness, for all of its problems and its issues. Joe Biden, they're not threats as like an outside threat. They are the threats to humanity. That's the truth. So, and then we had Trump possibly stripped of his protection. Representative Benny Thompson wanted to get rid of Trump's civil service protection. Earlier this year, Thompson proposed legislation that would strip protection for former presidents convicted of felonies, as Trump was in May. The act was tailored to target Trump. Thompson's office said, explaining the former president's criminal charges have created new exigency that Congress must address. Immediately following the shootings, one of Thompson's staffers wrote on Facebook that the shooter should get some shooting lessons so you don't miss next time. But she deleted the post, which Mississippi Republicans called despicable, shortly afterwards. So this is the environment. This is Russia's perspective. This is the environment, right, that they are putting out. Because why would they put it out? Well, they're putting it out because we have to be quite honest about it, that Russia, China, right? These countries are under incredible pressure as well. They are under the gun of possible regime change. So of course they're going to bring this up. Of course they are. So nonetheless, so those are those perspectives. Now we can get into the rest of the world's reaction to this. All right. Because there was a lot of reactions to it. And then we'll get into maybe a Ukraine story. I don't know if I'll be able to get to everything tonight. Okay, so let's get into the world's reaction. Let's see. And then, yeah, let's do this. So here we go. So the world reacted to this event here. And it was all, wishing him a speedy recovery, condemning political violence. You had, of course, Keir Starmer, for whatever that's worth. Political violence has no place in our societies. Literally, the Labour Party committed in political violence on Jeremy Corbyn's campaign just several years ago in order to keep him out, but no matter. Xi Jinping expressed compassion and sympathy to Trump on Sunday as China is closely following the situation surrounding the shooting of Donald Trump, former president, said the foreign ministry spokesperson in a statement. Viktor Orban, who had just met with Donald Trump in Mar-a-Lago, says that he has his thoughts and prayers to Trump during these dark hours. Giorgia Meloni of Italy said she's following with apprehension these updates and wished Trump a speedy recovery. Olaf Scholz of Germany said the attack on a presidential candidate Donald Trump is despicable. Wish him a speedy recovery. Emmanuel Macron said that France shares the shock and indignation of the American people. Then you have Lula da Silva, Milei. Okay, Javier Milei blamed the international left. Absolutely ridiculous for this. Then Lula said that the shooting must be strongly condemned of Brazil by all defenders of democracy and dialogue. But this is interesting. This is from Le Monde. They're trying to say that Russia is taking advantage of this. After numerous attempts to eliminate candidate Trump from the political arena using all legal tools, it is obvious to outside observers that his life is in danger, said Peskov. And so Russia called on the United States to take stock of its own policies of incitement and hatred used to create the conditions for the assassination. Addressing those who vote in the United States and supply arms to Kiev, the Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson, Maria Zakharova, denounced support for Kiev, which she said stoked attacks against the Russian president. And perhaps we better use this money to fund American police and other services that are supposed to ensure law enforcement. So some pretty good points here. So there's the reaction. I mean, you had Zelensky, talking about same thing, right? Everyone had a very similar message with, of course, Russia taking the time, as they did on RT as well, to show that there's some hypocrisy afoot that the United States should really take stock of. So, I mean, there you have it, right? There's a lot we could discuss. You had Nicolas Maduro of Venezuela come out and say that he wished Trump well, even though that there had been, of course, bad blood, right? Donald Trump's administration did try to take him out, although he did indicate that he likely associated that with John Bolton, okay? But nonetheless, the world outcry is in the main, right? What they don't want you to know. Most of the world, the multipolar world, views a situation like this as emblematic of issues that the United States has at a very deep level. This is what they don't want you to know about events like this. The United States political establishment wants you to think, oh, it's a lone actor, lone wolf. We don't have any context. We're going to investigate it and we'll never tell you absolutely anything. But what we can infer, indeed, is that this event is a creation of the horrific and absolutely despicable nature of the U.S. political and economic environment that grows in the United States and spreads abroad, right? Because It's not disconnected. A lot of people, when they look at foreign policy, they say, well, foreign policy is happening. The U.S. is doing this, that, and this, and it has no connection to the United States. But let's be quite honest here. It's the political environment, the economic environment, the social environment, all of it that exists in the United States right now. There's a lot of division. There's a lot. When we say division, we don't just mean people disagreeing on views. No, there's a lot of economic resentments. There's a lot of scapegoating. There's a lot of institutional and complete, really disgusting forms of injustice happening right here in the United States that it directly translates with how the United States government, how the United States political system, the United States foreign policy operates abroad. And it is that entire environment that creates the conditions for something like this to happen, because you have resentments, you have a lot of blaming going around, and then you have a lot of intense focus on presidential candidates. What were we talking about just before? What was if you looked at the mainstream media, both in the United States and the West, anything that covers the United States, what was being talked about? Well, Joe Biden, right? Joe Biden, his cognition, he's not fit. No one was talking about policy. No one was talking about, well, how about the genocide, right? How about Ukraine? How about the fact that Joe Biden hasn't done squat anything for ordinary people in the United States? How about the fact that Donald Trump is running? I mean, what was his campaign, right? His campaign was some things on foreign policy. He always says, like he said in 2016, right? And a position on Ukraine that drives the U.S. political establishment nuts, a position on NATO that drives the political establishment nuts. But we already have a track record where we can't necessarily take it seriously for whatever reason you want to put behind that. We can't say, well, if Trump was in there, Ukraine would end. Some people believe that. I don't necessarily believe that. And why don't I believe that? Well, because I don't think that presidents themselves are the key political actors. They are operatives of people who actually make decisions, right? People we don't get to even see or talk to ever. It's the people were mentioning, oh, well, Thomas Crooks was in a BlackRock video. It's the BlackRock executive, people like that. They're the ones who actually control things. They use their money, their largesse, and their influence to basically select the politicians they want to serve in the U.S. political system. And then we get to choose those servants, essentially. That is how U.S. politics works. That's what they don't want you to understand about this situation. And the reasons why they have disagreements with Donald Trump have absolutely nothing to do with policy, or at least with the policy that matters to people. As the Chinese observer, right, Mr. Wong, as the America Watcher, as he said, the public opinion in the United States has absolutely no bearing on policy, which means that there is a lot of resentment about the fact that U.S. politics are completely bankrupt and there's no connection to the daily life of ordinary people. And when that is allowed to go on long enough, well, if there is an environment, a hyper-partisan environment, people are going to take out their energies and frustrations on that partisan environment rather than take a real stand, get involved, educate themselves, and do something that will put real pressure on these kinds of people. No, what we get instead are these kind of so-called random acts of violence. But I don't believe in randomness in this situation because there's too many questions swirling. And what we do know, though, is that the United States has gone from being a unipolar power to really the clown show of the world, right? To the agent of chaos that is internally rotting. That is how the United States looks to the world, because its political system has become illegitimate and its overall policy, both at home and abroad, is one that people look at and not say, wow, that's something we want to imitate, but they say that's something we need to get away from. And we need to take any opportunity to do that when there is an opening for it. Unfortunately, for so many, there's no opening. Why? Because this system has a vice grip. The United States empire has a vice grip that can be quite difficult to get out of. So with that said, everybody, that is my coverage on this issue. Okay. This was a little difficult for me because, to be quite frank, I am not a big fan of covering this sort of stuff. It does not give me joy. I do not have a lot of passion for it. And the reason for that is there's just a lot of, I think for me, it just takes a lot of energy away from what I find to be most important, right? There's a lot of people giving prayers to Donald Trump. And look, Donald Trump was subject of an attempt on his life, and I'm not going to make light of that. But at the end of the day, there's 186,000 Palestinians that have lost their lives in a matter of less than a single year, right? It's about to be a year in October. But in a matter of just in less than a year, 186 Palestinians have been killed, and these same people were not given any kind of prayer to them. And we could say the same for many of the victims of American empire around the world. So these kind of topics are hard for me to do because at the end of the day, this channel's priority is to put real attention on the crimes of empire around the world. And those crimes, I saw it on my own channel, right? I posted a video earlier that day and I saw how the entire YouTube sphere just completely veered on this event, which of course is very understandable. On the other hand, it just shows that the partisan politics in the United States still trump, for lack of a better term, genuine politics, a really genuine people-centered politics, one that includes the fact that we have a real crisis around the world at hand, and it is being driven by the United States' foreign policy. So in any event, I'm going to move on to the next topic, okay? Please do like the stream, of course, but more importantly, if you do support this channel, if you do appreciate what I do here, consider going to the video description, okay, and becoming a member on Patreon, because subjects like this are usually not very well liked by the censors on places like YouTube and elsewhere. And so that means who knows what could happen to this channel and to this, not just this video, but this channel after covering this. So you can become a member on Patreon. You can become a member on Substack. You can become a member on YouTube. But the best place to do it is on Patreon. You can become an annual member for as little, I believe it's less than $5 a month, or $5. Yeah, less than $5 a month at an annual cost. And that will get you access to everything that I do. I do special posts for Patreon members and also take questions from Patreon members and suggestions on guests and things like that. The same goes for Substack, but in YouTube, but there's a little bit more of a limited interface on those platforms for multiple kinds of media. So on Substack, you get more writing, for example. But nonetheless, support on any of those platforms is great, Patreon being the preferred. That said, everybody, we are going to get into a Ukraine story, okay? And I'm just going to put up what, where's Desert Mantis? Where are you? Oh, I'm all the way. I need to go to the new comments. Let's see. Well, in any event, let's get to this topic. How about that? All right, here we go. Just need to get a swig of water before I started. The reality for Ukraine is a nightmarish one. And generally, when there's a crisis, especially in a conflict as brutal, as bloody, and as disastrous as a special military operation that Russia's waging against Ukraine has been for Ukraine, desperation begins to ensue. And most people, since July 13th, have been talking about Donald Trump and the assassination attempt on his life. But we have to understand that Donald Trump is no aberration, that when it comes to U.S. foreign policy, assassinations are part and parcel of a large number of tools used to gain and maintain political and economic control abroad, the staple of geopolitics. This is no truer than what's going on in Ukraine, because as Ukraine becomes more and more beleaguered, as it loses more and more manpower, more and more territory, and as its prospects for victory become not just dim, but completely out of the question, well, you have this happening. So Budanov, right, the top spy chief of Ukraine, has said that several attempts have been made to assassinate Vladimir Putin. So this is being reported by Yahoo News. And this is really an act of desperation. I'm going to say why in a bit. But there have been several attempts to assassinate Russian President Vladimir Putin, according to Kyrylo Budanov, the military intelligence service chief. As you can see, they were unsuccessful, he told New Voice on a Ukrainian website. The general did not say what his claim was based on. He also did not say whether his or the Ukrainian intelligence services might have been involved in his plans. Budanov has made provocative comments in the past as a form of psychological warfare. The Kremlin has responded, with Dmitry Peskov making clear the president's safety would be protected. The threat from the Kiev regime is obvious, he told TASS news agency. Budanov further said Putin was no longer a compromised figure accepted by all of the Russian elite, but because he has been in power for more than 20 years, Russians are afraid of losing him. So, right, all these dumb, ridiculous claims that are just not true. He said when Putin dies, he imagines the response will be similar to the death of Joseph Stalin. For people in the Soviet Union at the time, their whole world collapsed. They didn't know how they would go on living. So still making kind of veiled threats, right? This is how arrogant these people are. So little is known about attempted attacks on Putin during his lengthy time in power. An assassination attempt by men from the Caucasus failed in May 2022, shortly after Putin ordered the launch of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Budanov said, "There's no evidence of this." So we don't have any evidence, but we do know that the threat is clear, because they've been talking like this since the very beginning, right? The whole idea of Ukraine was not just about Ukraine, right? It's about the need to enact a kind of regime change on Russia. That is the point of the Ukraine proxy war from the perspective of NATO, and of course from the perspective of Ukraine, because Ukraine cannot win the war. Special military operation is Russia's. They can't win this war unless Vladimir Putin is ousted. Because what does Vladimir Putin's ouster mean? It means that Ukraine has won. That's what it means, because it means that the government has fallen, because Vladimir Putin has been inaugurated again. He's not going to be de-elected or unelected out of his seat. And nonetheless, you're not going to find a figure coming to ascendancy inside of Russia that holds a differing view on the special military operation. Why? Because the vast majority of people support the special military operation. So only a dismemberment of the Russian government could mean victory for Ukraine. So we should all remember that. But nonetheless, the desperation is very real. The Wall Street Journal has reported, right? There's been many damning reports in the Wall Street Journal. There's been reports on Russian jamming systems, weapon systems of Ukraine. which has caused many high-tech Western weaponry to be useless. But this is a story that isn't talked about as much, although it has been periodically reported on over the last 6 or so months. Here you have Ukrainian men desperate to escape war, drowning as they flee. So this is part of the desperation, is people are running away. People do not want to fight this war. It is not a winnable war. Ukraine is running out of manpower, and they're not necessarily running away because they oppose the war, right? Because a lot of polls still say that there's a lot of support. Whether those polls are legitimate or not, that's another question. But nonetheless, they're fleeing the prospect of death. Actually, not just the prospect, but the guarantee. They go to that front line. If they decide to fight against Russia, Russia at certain points in this conflict had been 1,000 people per day, 1,000 Ukrainian troops per day dead. They're likely to be one of them. So the Wall Street Journal says it was 7 weeks after Private Ivan Pinmalivsky had been due back on the front line with Russia when rescuers pulled his lifeless body from a river on Ukraine's western edge. His death added to a total of more than 24 other men who had drowned in the river Tisa since Russia invaded, many of them fugitives from a military draft aimed at sustaining Ukraine's war effort. Pidmalivsky was different. He had fought for 2 years after returning to Ukraine abroad to defend his country. His family had seen the war take a growing toll on the burly 32-year-old, but he never revealed the depths of his exhaustion to them. What was happening inside his soul, I do not know, said his mother. The bodies in the river are a grim manifestation of one of the biggest issues facing Ukraine as the war enters its third summer without a clear path to victory. Many of the men who initially mobilized to repel Russia's invasion are dead, missing, or wounded, and the rest are worn out from more than 2 years of brutal combat. Ukraine's government has struggled to replace them after dragging its feet over the politically unpopular decision to expand the draft. A wartime law bans men aged from 18 to 60 from leaving Ukraine. Still, tens of thousands have fled the country illegally, and many are lying low to avoid conscription. The delay in mustering fresh troops has increased the strain on soldiers serving with no prospect of demobilization other than through injury or death. Military contracts became indefinite when martial law was introduced in the early days of the war. We need to do this so that guys have a normal rotation, then their morale will be improved, said Zelensky in May to the BBC about the mobilization drive. A large number of the brigades were empty, he acknowledged. So, this is the desperation I'm talking about. Recruitment numbers have improved since Zelensky signed a law lowering the age of conscription to 25, along with steps to replenish threadbare ranks. Despite challenges, support for the war remains strong, according to the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, U.S. government-funded think tank we should all trust, right? Which found 58% supported mobilization compared to 35% against. But the conscription campaign has also driven more men into the shadows and inflamed tensions in society. Across the country, men are hiding from draft officers who have been filmed snatching conscripts off the street. Data from 3 neighboring countries indicates the number of men fleeing Ukraine illegally has increased in recent months. Border guards catching dozens of men daily, with some more desperate attempts ridiculed on social media. It's impossible to look at it without shame, the deputy commanders of 3rd Assault Brigade, after border guards caught 41 men trying to escape in the back of a grain truck last month. So it's a complete reversal, okay? I don't even have to read the rest. This is a reverse. But at the same time, this has been going on since the beginning. I mean, we've seen imagery of Ukraine literally fortifying their borders with wiring, like almost copying what Israel does to keep Palestinians out, keep Palestinians in their prison, essentially, in Gaza. We are seeing this now with Ukraine literally using barbed wire to fortify their borders so that people can't leave. People want to leave. Men want to leave. They do not want to fight. They don't want to die. In the cost. I mean, we're talking about a world war, not in terms of, we could say this is a world war scenario that's being played out, but in terms of the kind of fighting, we are talking about the fighting, the trench warfare. We're talking about war of attrition. We're talking about brutal, bloody, traumatic, mass death. It is ugly. It's a meat grinder, they call it. And now Russia is literally just wiping Ukrainian forces off the map with its superior air power. It is something that, of course, people do not Ukrainian men do not want to just walk into. So this is just one part of the desperation. But friend of the show, Scott Ritter, is now going to talk to you about how Ukraine has become an open target when it comes to its weapon systems. So it's not just that Ukrainian men want to flee. You have to ask yourselves, why do they want to flee? Well, it's because the weapon systems that they are ill-equipped to man, ill-equipped to run, are also just open targets of the Russians. It's a hopeless situation. So Scott Ritter was on Sputnik. This is his report on Zelensky in Ukraine, begging for air defense systems, getting them, right? Patriot systems, getting them in a haphazard, slow, and manner. And here's his response to what it really says about this conflict.
Ukraine seems to have a particular desire for the Patriot air defense system, but it'll take whatever it can get, whether it be NASAMS, whether it be the Iris-T, whether it be the French Mamba. They're just looking for modern air defense systems. The problem is, how do you reconstruct integrated air defense umbrella when you don't have an existing umbrella under which you will be allowed to maneuver these newly acquired air defense batteries into place, set them up, get them prepared to fight? You see, when Ukraine was initially provided with these NATO air defense systems, the Patriots, NASAMS, Iris-T, Mamba, they had a Soviet-era air defense umbrella that consisted primarily of the S-300 air defense system, but there were others, the Buk and other systems in place. And so Russia had to contend with an existing capable air defense system in order to get to the air defense systems that were being provided by NATO. This allowed Ukraine the time to put these systems where they wanted to put them and to operate them roughly the way they were intended to be operated, including with great assistance from Western technical specialists, Western intelligence, etc. But now we have a situation where this air defense umbrella no longer exists. And when Ukraine brings in their air defense systems, they have to do so in a very makeshift, haphazard manner. They aren't able to use them the way they were designed. This requires trickery, turning on and off radars, firing missiles before radar lock is taking place. It's a very inefficient way to use air defense systems. And because Russia is able to put an intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance umbrella over Ukraine, anytime Ukraine uses air defense, it's detected, and then the Russians, in very short order, locate and destroy the system. So pretty much Ukraine's in one of these vicious cycles where there simply isn't enough weapon systems available to allow Ukraine to build the air defense umbrella it needs. And Russia will continue to destroy those weapon systems that are provided by the West, depleting the West's own supply of air defense system. This is one of the detrimental consequences of the attritional warfare that's being waged today in Ukraine. Russia is able to destroy Ukrainian military equipment provided by the West, especially air defense, at a rate far greater than the West can resupply Ukraine or even replenish its own stocks. This is a losing equation. And without air defense, Ukraine is literally an open target for Russia to take apart as it best sees fit.
So that's just the reality, right? We're talking about a reality where, one, you have desperate attempts to take the life of Vladimir Putin, not working, right? Obviously, Vladimir Putin is in a lot more secure position than Donald Trump is, given that Donald Trump was this close to being killed as a former president. Vladimir Putin has obviously thwarted all assassination attempts against him, if any have actually been able to get off the ground, according to the words of Budanov, Ukraine's top spy chief. Then you have the fact that Ukrainian men, it's a manpower issue too. They're not only being killed in massive numbers, but they are trying to flee. They are trying to leave. They do not want to fight in this war because it has had such a terrible social cost onto them, not just with the risk of their life, the possibility that they will die, actually the guarantee they will die if they fight in this war, but also the fact that it is just a war with no end. And generally, those are the kinds of wars that people want to not fight in. And then you have the weapons situation, right? This is just an overall disaster for Ukraine. The weapons situation where it doesn't matter how many more weapons the US and NATO pump into Ukraine. Not only are their numbers going to be insufficient, but Russia will just destroy whatever comes their way anyway. If it's an F-16, goodbye. If it's a Patriot missile system, goodbye. Russia has built up its defense industrial base up to the point where these weapon systems are just going to be eliminated upon their potential use. Even who knows if an F-16 will get up in the air, if right, because you have to wonder, well, they have to be shipped to Ukraine. They're not going to fly them over any kind of airspace from a NATO country, right, like Netherlands to Ukraine. No, they're going to have to ship them another way. They're going to have to deliver them a different way. They're not going to use them. Most of them are too old probably to even be used. It's a disaster. It's an ongoing disaster, and all of this leads to the ultimate conclusion from the New York Times here. NATO's pledges to Ukraine fall short of a counteroffensive this year. Weapons donations from the US and European countries will take weeks, if not months, to reach the front lines. Over and over and over again, we hear this. We've heard this every single time. We heard it Vilnius in the last NATO summit, now this NATO summit this past July. Again, pledges that will not make it to Ukraine for weeks, if not months. All right. Despite billions of dollars in additional weapons and security assistance, says the New York Times, that NATO announced this week, allied officials are saying Ukraine would not be ready to launch a dramatic counteroffensive or retake large swaths of territory from Russia until next year. Next year. Donations of missiles, combat vehicles, ammunition, and air defenses from the United States and European countries will take weeks, if not months, to reach the front lines. Some of the newly committed weapons have not even been bought or built. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said long-anticipated F-16 fighter jets would be delivered to Ukraine this summer, but even then, they might be used mostly defensively as allies debate on the sidelines of the NATO summit in Washington whether warplanes could fly into Russian airspace to attack. On many occasions, you could see that we decide, but unfortunately, we cannot deliver efficiently, said the president of Lithuania in a brief interview on Wednesday. This is a huge disappointment for me personally because Ukrainians are expecting those goods will come. This military equipment will reach Ukraine, but it's not happening. So thanking allies for the munitions on Thursday, Zelensky of Ukraine said, we expect them to be delivered as soon as possible so many lives can be saved. So most of the pledges to Ukraine at the NATO summit are described as long-term commitments to help ensure the country's security over the next decade. They include a NATO-run weapons and training coordination center based in Germany and donations of $43 billion with support from alliance states in 2025. Senior NATO officials said the support would put Ukraine on a path toward being able to push back Russia next year while Ukraine waits for more Western weapons to arrive and moves more of its troops to the front. So the New York Times, what are they saying here? They are saying that we are looking at 2025 as the target date for another counteroffensive. But it just so happens that we are only just halfway through 2024, meaning that Ukraine is going to have to wait many, many months. There's not going to be any hard fighting in the dead of winter. So we are likely looking at a long period of attrition for Ukraine. And what does that mean? What does that mean for Ukraine? It means that the steady and slow, albeit push of Russia, its special military operation, its policy to fight an attritional war. And the reason why it fights this policy is because it does not want to, one, get into an open conflict with NATO. It could, in many respects. Mark Sloboda is on here and says offense is hard. And one of the points I make when it comes to offense is hard is that you have to take into consideration of everything, the cost on Ukraine to basically take out the government, what that would mean politically for Russia on the world stage. It would essentially play into the hands of the narrative that Russia is an invading power. Then if Russia plays into those hands, well, then the narrative gets spun out of control by the real chaos agents in NATO, and who knows what they will do. That is a consideration that many people do not take into account. The fact that NATO is not to be trusted, the United States cannot be trusted here. So, what Russia is doing is it is stabilizing itself and fighting a war toward a real path to victory over time. That victory is coming. And there is no doubt that the New York Times reporting that there will be no counteroffensive is part of that process. It is part of that admission that nothing of the sort for Ukraine is possible. Nothing like a victory is possible for Ukraine. They are going to have to wait 4, 6, 8, 10 months to even be able to get off the ground a so-called counteroffensive. But what will be left of Ukraine for such a thing? Will there be anything left for something called a counteroffensive once these weapons reach? And once the weapons reach Ukraine, once they're able to be used, why wouldn't Russia just take them out? This is the big dilemma that the United States and NATO are facing in Ukraine. They have a myriad of crises they just cannot get out of the way of. It's not going to end well for them. They have no other options. The only other option is to take this war to Russia. That is what they're trying to do. There's all these talks about possibly allowing Ukraine to strike deep inside of Russia, right? To hit so called military airfields and things like that. What that would essentially do is give Ukraine carte blanche to wage a NATO sponsored war on Russia and spark the World War III scenario that nobody wants to see, which would inevitably become nuclear. That is something that is unlikely to occur under the Biden administration. But if it does, it means that we are that much closer to the end times, essentially. So we better hope that that does not occur. But we are getting to the position in this conflict where the desperation of the Kiev regime, the desperation of NATO is becoming so intense that everything that Ukraine does, everything that NATO does, not only has the stench of failure written all over it, but it also has a stench of desperation. Whether it's Budanov just talking casually about assassination attempts on Vladimir Putin, whether it's about the manpower issue where you have Ukrainians fleeing for their lives, hoping to escape the prospect and the guarantee of death on the front lines, whether it is the fact that all these weapons that are promised for months from now are just there to be transferred so they can be destroyed by Russia in the near, medium, or long term future. That doesn't sound like any hope for victory. That doesn't sound like the accomplishment and achievement that NATO had hoped for at the beginning of this conflict. It doesn't sound like Russia is in trouble. It sounds like Ukraine is the one that is in big trouble. And so while all of the eyes are going to be on the US political cycle for quite some time after the attempted murder of Donald Trump, the fact of the matter is that there is a big danger on the global stage that we currently face that is not disconnected from Donald Trump. That big danger is the fact that the United States is on a war footing with Russia that it cannot arrest, but it cannot win, which means that you have an empire like the United States that is not just backed into a corner, it's not just finding itself completely and utterly with fewer and fewer options to wage its endless war against Russia, but it means that the regime change operatives, those who make foreign policy, those who essentially pay them to make foreign policy, they are going to become more and more reckless. That is why we are at the point of talking about strikes deep inside of Russia, let alone over the border in just over Kharkov, right? We're not even talking about those kind of strikes. We're talking about deep inside of Russia, We're talking about long-term stability for Ukraine. They're not really talking about NATO membership anymore because they never really wanted that. They're talking about, a permanent pathway or a irreversible pathway to membership. All that means is that there's not going to be really NATO membership for Ukraine, but NATO already has made Ukraine a de facto member. But rather than having the status of equality with its that comes with being in NATO, Ukraine is simply a proxy, and Ukraine is going to forever be a proxy so long as that its regime and NATO are so wedded that it can just literally be used as a battering ram, albeit an ineffective one against Russia. That is likely to continue, and that's why the danger of this conflict spinning out of control will remain for quite some time, and that's why we are going to have to continue to pay attention so that our eyes, our ears, and our minds are all ready to move forward in the direction of peace and to oppose these reckless moves by the NATO US foreign policy establishment, currently taking a wrecking ball, not just to the people of Ukraine, aiming it at Russia, but really the entire world, which suffers with its endless war regime. All right, everybody. I'm not going to end the stream, but I can't do the next story, unfortunately. Although I might if I muster up some energy. I am not sure if I have it. Because that Trump segment took a lot of time. It's getting late out this way. I have streams coming up in any event. Okay, I do have streams coming up. So how about we move on to there's no super chats today, which is disturbing. Maybe it's I don't know what it is. Usually there are super chats, but no super chats, it seems like today, so I can't really shout out super chatters in that regard. I don't see anything on Rumble either, although I have been missing. Sorry to the Rumble community for missing your chats. None on Rockfin either. So I'm just going to give a few plugs, give some announcements. If there's any questions or anything like that, you can send them in a super chat. That's great. So let us do this. All right, let us wind down. Here we go. Okay. So announcements. Tuesday. Okay, Tuesday, July 16th, I will have Ali Abunimah, 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time, on this program to talk about Israel, the state of the Palestinian resistance, the state of the axis of resistance. We will have an in-depth conversation about all things, okay? All things that have to do with West Asia. We'll also get into other global things because Ali Abunimah, man, he is he's somewhat of a genius, I would call him, not just on these affairs, but on most things. He's an incredible journalist. The Electronic Intifada does great things. I donate to the Electronic Intifada because I believe they are really at the forefront of exposing to the world the real situation in Palestine, regionally, etc. They've been doing it for years. So Ali Abunimah, 8:30 p.m. Eastern, July 16th. And July 17th, I'm going to welcome back Pepe Escobar at 11 a.m. So we'll have 2 streams in 2 days, okay? 11 a.m. Eastern, July 17th, Pepe Escobar. And then the next week, I'm working on some things. I'll probably welcome back Scott Ritter to the show to talk about Netanyahu's visit to Congress. I got to actually make sure I message him about that. And then I'll probably have a stream on the 25th. I'm working on maybe Eugene Perio from Breakthrough News. I'm going to try to get a second guest as well on that day. That may round out July's guests. okay, that may round out July's guests. I was having Jill Stein on, but we keep getting delayed because we're trying to get Jeffrey Sachs on here, and his schedule's kind of whacked. He has a lot going on. But we will figure it out with Jill Stein and potentially with Jeffrey Sachs and or Michael Hudson joining. Okay. People are asking about, so I'll Simone Sterling, who also gave a super chat. That's why I'm pulling you up right now. Yes, Richard Medhurst and I are friendly. I really like Richard Medhurst. He's a very smart guy. I will welcome him back again soon. I've had him on my show several times actually in the last year, I think. He's very busy though. He's very, very busy. He's I would say he is a workhorse journalist. So it's not easy, you know. Guests are hard to obtain. So thank you for that suggestion though. Okay. What else? Some people are saying Greg Stoker, the Gray Zone. Yeah, I am considering maybe I will have on one of those folks also during that time. Okay. Yeah, that's a good point. Okay. We have Trusting Success with the super sticker. Thank you. And of course, Simone Sterling. Sorry. I do love your work. I mean, you don't have to apologize. If people give super chats, if they can. If they can't, I cannot blame them. Or if they won't, that is your choice. That is not something. I'm not going to force you. I'm not going to bully you. But I mean, generally, it's just interesting. David Case of VJ Prashad would be a great guest. I am looking to line him up for August. Okay. So before I go to China, I think I already have him August 9th, I believe, tentatively. He's a very busy guy. So, but thank you, David, and thank you for your support as a moderator. And I believe member or you subscribe somewhere. So I appreciate you. Arlene Chambers, thank you so much. Thanks for your in-depth analysis on Trump assassination. Do you think Dems will bump Biden ASAP? So Arlene, thank you for being a longtime supporter of this channel. Thank you for watching. No, I don't think they're going to bump him ASAP now. Actually, I believe that this event may actually help Biden just stick around. Doesn't mean that he has any shot in winning, although we make mistakes sometimes in predicting things like U.S. elections because indeed they are a selection process. And if the elite want Joe Biden to win, they are going to have Joe Biden win. It just so happens that I don't believe that Joe Biden has that kind of cachet anymore. I believe that they have seen his presidency as mainly a lame duck presidency. And I don't believe it's for the reasons that we are being told. We're being told it's all about up here. I believe that the elites would be fine if public opinion were fine with it, with a literal vegetable, pardon my derogatory words, but someone who's literally hooked up on life support, just occupying the White House, as long as the policies remain the same, as long as whoever his healthcare proxy or his guardian, as long as they were enacting the policies that they want, I believe they would be okay with that. But people have to be okay with that. And because Joe Biden has made such prominent mistakes, some of the latest being calling Kamala Harris Donald Trump, some of the latest being calling Vladimir Zelensky Vladimir Putin, right? These are big mistakes that reflect very poorly on empire. And I believe that is the reason why Joe Biden has lost favor with the elite. But I do believe they would be okay with him continuing to run if he could look the part to any degree. I mean, look at how long they stood by him. He wasn't looking good in 2020. There were articles, there were reports about his fitness for presidency being questioned because people on social media were laughing at his gaffes then. They didn't care. They used him as the candidate to coalesce the elite around. They took out every single one of those 10 plus candidates who were running in that primary, if you remember correctly. And they all coalesced around Joe Biden, even though at that time he looked like a eventual corpse. So this is the state of U.S. politics. I don't believe they are going to bump him ASAP, because I don't think they're going to be able to calculate what just happened to Trump as anything that could benefit them. So there are a lot of kind of murmurs that the Democrats are actually going to take the road maybe very well traveled by the Democrats, which is when the going gets rough for the Democrats, they say, we don't really need to be the winners right now. We can just be the opposition party. That kind of helps them keep their base in political alignments, because if they can look like the opposition party to big, scary Trump, the big, scary, bad Republicans, that can allow them to maintain a semblance of legitimacy rather than being in office. Because what happens when you do have the presidency and you do have the Congress? Well, people start looking at you and saying, what have you done for me lately? Have you helped me with my wages, my health care, my life situation? Oh, what about these wars? What about these issues? All of these issues that we're facing in the United States. People start to wonder, hey, have you done anything for me lately? And usually the answer is no. And then when they find out how their life is going under a Democratic Party administration, they say, wow, our life has actually gotten a lot worse. So that is a dilemma for the Democrats. So I don't believe they're just going to necessarily oust him right away. It doesn't mean that they're not going to do it, because all the way up until this point, before July 13th, all indications looked like Joe Biden was toast and that there would be some kind of replacement process coming. But then again, now this has kind of opened up, I think, some breathing room. A lot of attention will be on Donald Trump and what just happened to him. And you heard Joe Biden. What did he say? He said we need to cool things down. And Joe Biden's a serial liar, just like all U.S. politicians, but I believe he means that. And not for the reasons that he stated. People in the United States, they need to be united, blah, blah, blah. All of this rhetoric to just save his butt. It's a public relations stunt. But when he says cooling, I really do think what he means by that is that right now the election rhetoric needs to get dimmer. And in retrospect, that will help Joe Biden. Maybe not for him to win, but it'll help prolong his campaign. For a lot of these sycophantic, narcissistic people in the political class, right? Agents of the elites, they don't really care about anything else other than their careers. They're not looking at what have I done? What's my legacy? Some of that, there's part of that. But oftentimes for neocons, for plutocrats, for corporate sponsored politicians, when they look at legacy, they're not really talking about, well, how do people think about us truthfully? They think, well, how much was I able to do and bamboozle people into believing that I was something worth supporting? I was a person worth supporting and looking at fondly. Look at the Obama legacy, for example. That's the entire Obama legacy, is literally being a war criminal, destroying the lives of people, being a complete and utter disaster for poor and working class people, especially Black Americans, and yet being able to come out of that with a veneer, even if it was whittled down over time, but with the veneer of, well, look, I was a historic president. I was the first Black president, and I was someone who was the lesser of two evils over that time period, making my candidacy a success. That's the legacy, right? The true legacy is, of course, much different. War criminality, absolute impoverishment that only got worse under his reign, and a whole lot of broken promises. And the same goes now for Joe Biden, because the Democrats are different. And this is why the Democratic Party finds itself in this crisis of legitimacy, is because they are different. They are not the Republicans. No one expects the Republicans to do anything for people. Let's be honest. And even for those who support Donald Trump, most people who support Donald Trump who are like these, oh yeah, MAGA, MAGA, MAGA. They're not demanding Donald Trump enact economic policies that actually benefit them. I'm sure, right? A lot of people are arguing, and I believe they exist. I believe that there might be maybe a misconceived notion that Donald Trump's economic rhetoric will translate into something beneficial for them. That's not out of the question. But for most people who are maybe cultish and obsessed with someone like Donald Trump, it's more about the disruption that he brings, the personality that he has. Perhaps it's even some of his more opportunistic viewpoints on immigration and things like this that really drive their support. So at the end of the day, they're not really demanding much of him. Why? Well, because the GOP is the party of zero expectations. The expectations of the GOP is to just be a more, how should I say, an oppositional party to the Democrats. Oppose everything that the Democrats do, but at the end of the day, both parties ultimately unite on many key things that hurt everybody. And that's the folly of partisanship. Republicans have to look like the oppositional flank of the Democrats. The Democrats have to look like the oppositional flank of the Republicans. At the end of the day, they just look like one political party that serves one political agenda, which is the agenda of the elites. And that is why I just all of these predictions and all of this turmoil and all of this crisis, it's a public relations crisis for the United States at the surface, for the elites at the surface. And I do believe they are going to want to do anything to stabilize the situation. And right now, with the attention away from Biden's gaffes and his mental state, I believe they'll probably choose to prolong this process of change for as long as they can. And that will maybe, for the Democrats, give them some kind of idea of how they want to do this, because they just can't enact change without having some kind of process. And the brokered convention process is going to be a nightmare. There's so many drawbacks to this position that they are in. And Donald Trump's July 13th dance with death doesn't even help them at a political level. So they are going to have to just be okay with time and okay with the fact that the news cycle isn't paying attention to someone like Joe Biden right now. And that's what they're going to have to settle for. All right. In any event, here we have Studio Rainer. If Trump wins, U.S. and Russia become allies. I hope they both dealt with the Ukraine issue in different ways. You know, I gotta say, I don't agree with that. It's so interesting, you know, and I really appreciate your super chat. But I will say, Studio Rainer, that I don't believe that the United States is going to become allies with Russia because of Trump being president. And I think we have his first term as president as a pretty good example of this. Actually, foreign policy toward Russia got more hostile. And I don't really have an interest in quibbling about, well, was that Donald Trump's fault, or was that the deep state? Was that the foreign policy establishment? Was it a combination of the two? You know, it's quite obvious that while on the one hand, Donald Trump spoke a big game about Russia, he didn't follow through to the extent which made a difference in the calculus of U.S. foreign policy toward Russia. The fact is that the INF gone under Trump. The fact is that the United States didn't draw back NATO at all under Trump's regime. Support for Ukraine, this buildup toward the special military operation, that didn't go away under Donald Trump. It just continued onward. And of course, sanctions on Russia got worse under Donald Trump. So the Helsinki summit that occurred, that was nice, but that was nice optics. But U.S. foreign policy toward Russia didn't necessarily change, even if the rhetoric by Donald Trump was not as vitriolic. And that matters. I'm not going to say that it does not matter that Trump's rhetoric was less hostile toward Russia. It does matter, right? What we say matters. Words do matter, but they don't matter as much as our actions. We have to always understand that. Our words can have an impact. Our words can damage people. There's such thing, right, in psychology as psychological abuse, right? There is such thing as it. And psychological abuse can be, of course, in how we behave and what we do, but our words can be psychologically abusive. We can, right? You see someone walk down the street yelling at their dog. that dog could incur psychological abuse from that, become a fearful dog, an aggressive dog, whatever, because of our words. Well, gotta say that Donald Trump's words were important. And I do find his words on Russia to be important. I believe it's an important break. I don't believe it's necessarily a progressive thing. I don't think it's necessarily for peace. But I do believe that it is one of the reasons why there are factions in the deep state that want to see him gone. On the other hand, though, we have to be really clear about the actual state of U.S. politics and how the U.S. political system, how its overall apparatus works, its overall state apparatus, what it serves, what system does it really serve, and does someone like Donald Trump really have the power to enact true transformation over that? No, he doesn't. And the fact of the matter is that we are going to continue to see the United States move further and further toward a war footing with Russia, not because Donald Trump is going to be the principal champion of that, but because even if he's in office, he's not going to have any kind of power to arrest that process. He will just be swept up by it, just like in 2016, because the conditions of Russia's rise are really what are the problem. The conditions of Russia's rise are contingent upon and really dependent upon the fact that the multipolar world is emerging and is being birthed out of the very pregnant womb of a declining and dying empire. And that is what the United States is going to want to arrest. So as long as the U.S. political system remains what it is, a corporate captured warmongering system controlled by a so-called deep state, which is really just the real state, as long as it is controlled by these forces, which represent a very tiny, tiny few of people who are well endowed, who are incredibly wealthy, who have stolen everything and taken everything from us and the rest of the planet, as long as they rule, as long as their profit system rules, their system of greed and exploitation and plutocracy, as long as that rules, we can call it capitalism, we can call it imperialism, whatever you want to call it, as long as they rule, it's going to continue. This path toward a destructive global confrontation that has as its primary targets Russia and China it's going to continue. And that continuation process has Donald Trump. He is a manifestation of how this system is breaking down and how the cracks and crevices are leading to chaos. But he is not going to be in and of himself a force that can arrest this process. The only thing that can arrest this process is a people-centered movement, one that involves many, many people. It doesn't have to necessarily be a majority, but it does involve many, many people with a clear understanding, of how things work in the United States, and with a clear objective to enact the kind of pressure that will cause change. How that happens? Well, there are many different theories. There are many different activities that people engage in that I won't go over and over and over here because I don't have a single answer for how to do that. Some people run third-party candidates. Other people try to organize unions. Some people try to organize peace movements. Others try to create media like we do here. But regardless of what we do, it's going to have to become more coordinated, more united, and more clear on exactly what it means to enact and to be part of a people-centered political process in the United States, and whether that is even possible under this current arrangement. But we can't even get to that point. We can talk about it, but we can't get to whether it's possible or not without people actually moving in a much stronger way to test out whether it's possible or not, right? What we have now is not powerful enough. Even the millions of people on the streets supporting Palestine, not powerful enough. Why? Because people in power are not threatened by millions of people just marching outside for Palestine. Of course, they're going to repress them. Of course, they're going to try to stop it all. but it is not hindering activity. It is causing embarrassment. It is an anathema politically. So that's why they are repressed. And there has been brutal repression, like on Columbia's campus, etc. But it is not going to change the political calculus in the United States. We will need something even stronger. We will need something even more broad. We will need something that has not been seen in many, many, many years. We will need a broad movement, a working class centered movement that gets people in motion in many different areas toward a new and more just political and economic arrangement in this country. And until that becomes more and more of a possibility, we will see the same kind of process happening. And unfortunately, we will have people believe that somehow a political figure like Donald Trump or Barack Obama or whoever it is, or even insurgent candidates like Bernie Sanders. Look at how many people were disappointed by Bernie Sanders. I was talking about him being a pig of war, of him being an imperialist, all of this stuff. We have to be careful for these fork-tongued social democrats like Bernie Sanders who believe that they can come in and enact all this massive political change domestically while at the same time supporting sanctions and rhetoric, a regime change on countries like Syria, that somehow we can't be suspicious. And look at what happened. He capitulated completely, and now he is campaigning for Biden more passionately than most Democrats, right? That's what this political system engenders. It engenders capitulation. And so we will continue to see people go through this process, and it's about how we respond to it. It's about how we educate people to see something better, to see something bigger that will matter the most. And that is what I hope we can get out of July 13th, the day that will live in infamy. I don't want to hear about all of the, well, what happened, all this. Yeah, we're gonna have, I'm curious. Yeah, we all have curiosities that we want to itch, but at the end of the day, we need to understand that there are so many events in our recent history. I've been a part of some of them, right? What happened in Boston, right? The so-called Boston bombing. There's so many events, so many questions that never really get answered because there's no interest in us having them answered, right? There's no interest for the elites to allow that to happen. So what we have to do is, sure, maybe some of us should investigate it independently. But the truth is we need to begin to build a system where this kind of secrecy and lack of transparency and these events that just shake us to the core are no longer possible, because we, the people, are the agents of history now. And we, the people, want to see a society that runs for us and by us and in our interests. That is what I hope events like this can show us. Not that we should support any one of the two parties more, not that we should go down rabbit holes of, man, how could this have happened like this? I do think we need to ask questions, but we also need to have an idea of where we want those questions to lead us in terms of our principles, not necessarily lead us toward the answers. We may never find the answers to a lot of the questions we seek. I was joking with my wife today. I said a lot of what happened on July 13th, we probably won't find out until WikiLeaks 2.0 happens, right? Until there's some kind of whistleblower who decides to take, information that's supposed to be classified and releases it to the public like it should be released, right? They give the people the knowledge that they have been withheld. But until that happens, we're probably likely only going to have speculation, because whenever a political system as corrupt and bankrupt as the U.S. investigates itself, well, we all know what to expect from that. Not much. So then what next, right? What next? Well, what next is we need to continue forward on a path toward what the Chinese call rejuvenation. We are in a path of decline. We are in a path of collapse, not total collapse, because an empire can't totally collapse until the people replace it with something else. If it totally collapses based on anything else, we're talking about a a crisis that doesn't really, we talk about the fall of the Roman Empire, all these things, but really all those things birthed something different, even if there was a lot of pain and a lot of chaos that ensued out of it. But until there is something different that is going to be birthed here in the United States, well, we can expect more of the same. But that doesn't mean that we can't be a positive force, a leading light, so to speak, for real truth, for real justice in our time. So hopefully July 13th is not a time to, live in fear and live in doubt, but a time to live in a moment that is truly historic in nature. So I have a new member here. The Blazer 55. Thank you so much for becoming a YouTube member. I really appreciate it. All right. So with all that said, everyone, I should head out of here. Okay. It's getting late. Got to get out of here. It was a great stream today. I appreciate all of your support. Thank you so much for Adina for becoming a Patreon member. Thanks so much for the someone who bought me a coffee during this stream. I really appreciate that. As I said before, streams like this are very tricky, right? Because I am talking about an event that very well could enact censorship. So that's why I'm advocating for those folks who are here, okay, to consider becoming a paid member, especially on Patreon, right? So I'm going to plug Patreon the most. There's many options in the video description, but become a member on Patreon, because what you are doing when you become a member on Patreon is you are becoming a long-term sustainer of this program, which ensures that if I were to be censored in any way to a large degree, then I have the option to continue the work anyway. It is difficult to become an ongoing sustainer, I understand, but ultimately, if you become an annual member on Patreon, you are paying less than a cup of coffee per month in many places in the US in order to support this work. So I really do highly encourage it. We have a great community on Patreon, and that is what I will say on that. In any event, everybody, I will be back. It is looking like on Tuesday evening, okay? Tuesday evening, I will be back with Mr. Ali Abu Nima, the editor, the chief editor. I believe he is the chief editor over at Electronic Intifada. We will talk everything West Asia, including the multipolar world in retrospect. We will talk about the situation Israel finds itself in, which I didn't get to speak about tonight because so much other things have been happening. And we will make it so. Then Wednesday morning, the very next day, it's going to be a busy week. The very next day, I will have on Pepe Escobar to talk about the multipolar world, of course, his latest work he's been working on. We'll have to get into some shenanigans, but of course, because this is going to be an ongoing story for quite a while, but he will return to talk about the developments in the multipolar world as we lead into the BRICS summit. He is kind of the correspondent for that. With all that said, everybody, I am going. Okay. Take care, everybody. Thank you so much for all of your support. As you leave here, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. And if you are able to, become a sustaining member on Patreon to help fight the censorship. Stay well, everybody. These are really interesting times, harrowing times, difficult times for so many. But do know that I genuinely just deeply appreciate everything that you have done to make this channel what it is. It's an incredible experience for me. It is one that, regardless of what happens from here on out, I can never forget. And it has given a huge boost to my motivations to continue in independent media for the long term. So know that you all have been part of that process, and it is really humbling for me. And I want to just give you all the props that you deserve. Give all the moderators all of the great well wishes and thank yous that you deserve. I see Connie now in there, Desert Mantis. I know Ware was here earlier. All the YouTube members, all the Patreon members, all the Substack members, all the one-time supporters, people who buy me coffee, who do super chats. You are all incredible. Everyone take care of yourselves. Over and out. Peace out.